All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
Well, thank goodness no one was hurt. HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. It seems like every time a woman's false allegation and its consequences make the news, feminists come out of the woodwork to tell everyone how it's an exception to the norm, how rare these occurrences really are, and how harmless they think it is to falsely accuse a man of a heinous crime. Harmless? Tell it to the most recent target of a woman's public damseling over something that never happened. Oh wait, you can't. Alex Holoka is dead by his own hand. He cannot be protected against fallout from the mud his accuser flung at him. And as it turns out, as more information has come out about their history in the wake of his death, it's certainly starting to look as if she was projecting the whole time. Not only did she apparently lie about her target, it looks as if she was the abuser in their relationship. But is using such an extreme example really appropriate? After all, we've been assured by feminists that in the vast majority of the tiny fraction of allegations they admit are false, nothing bad happens to the accused. They'll even get mad if you call him a victim of the liar's social weaponry. Are they right? Ask Luke Harwood. Oh wait, you can't do that either. After being falsely accused by his neighbor, Alice Hall, the 18-year-old was beaten to death by a gang led by Hall's sister, Emma. The gang was particularly callous and brutal, casually cleaning up evidence of their crime and planning to mutilate the teenager's body to further ward off detection. Their actions were only discovered because Emma turned on her co-conspirators and told police about the murder. But that's only two, right? Well, how about Jason Wolfendale's attack on an unnamed victim who had been falsely accused of groping a teen at a party? Or Donald Robinson, who was beaten to death in the street after Latiqua Mays publicly shouted her false accusation against him? Even Florida Man isn't exempt. Seriously. Brittany Sorey fabricated a strange and brutal sexual assault involving a broken broom handle and a box cutter, then later attributed it to a neighbor in the midst of his confrontation with a friend she allowed to stay in her home. Her lie escalated the conflict, leading to the innocent neighbor's death. For this, Sorey was charged on a single misdemeanor count of falsely reporting a crime. But does a false accusation need to result in the target's death to be considered harmful? Does it even have to result in vigilante violence at all? Would any of the feminists who dismiss false allegations as a non-issue consent to being imprisoned without cause for any length of time? That's the experience of hundreds, mostly men but including some women, served by the wonderful folks involved with the Innocence Project. Founded in 1992 by Peter Neufeld and Barry Scheck at the Cardozo School of Law, the Innocence Project's mission is to free the staggering number of innocent people who remain incarcerated and to bring reform to the system responsible for their unjust imprisonment. After exonerees are released, some of whom have spent years in prison for crimes they did not commit, this group's social work department provides support as they rebuild their shattered lives. The group's website currently lists 289 cases of wrongful conviction for sex crimes, about 77% of their total, currently at 377 cases. Many of these cases involve exonerees who had served more than a decade, with far too many having served more than a quarter of a century, and some over 30 years, long enough that had their incarceration been a career, they'd be eligible for retirement. Even those whose length of incarceration is not so extreme suffer life-altering consequences. Just ask Brian Banks, whose entire career path was destroyed by his wrongful incarceration, as it consumed his window of opportunity for the use of his peak athletic ability right when he was on the path to becoming a professional football player. But what of men who are never incarcerated? Ask the Good Samaritan in Florida, who was forced to flee his hometown for his safety after trying to help a lost toddler find her parents, who subsequently accused him of trying to kidnap her. For his altruism, his reputation has been decimated by a social media mob that shared his photo, his Facebook page, and his place of business, falsely accusing him of being a child predator. In Dayton, Ohio, I've seen one man falsely accused over and over, wrongly arrested and subjected to repeated police interrogation, extorted for bail and court costs, drained by attorney fees, and left unemployable by reputation damage and psychological trauma. Another, whose alleged crime was physically impossible, was wrongly convicted, put on a registry, and forced into sex offender treatment that included attempts to force him to admit to a crime that never happened and, quote, come to terms with the many implications such a crime has regarding its alleged perpetrator and victim. It took 8 years for him to straighten out that mess, during which he was punished with increased restrictions and threats of jail every time he refused to accept the label the state was imposing on him. Both men suffered stress-related health conditions, altered career paths, and damage to their relationships with friends and family as a result of their ordeals. Accusations of intimate partner and sexual violence can cost the target his right to bear arms, a loss that can be devastating to an avid hunter, a gun collector, or even just an individual who keeps a handgun in his home for protection. He can face limitations on where he is allowed to live, and if he's already housed in the wrong place, be forced to move. If he's young, the accusation can impact his character development by subjecting him to environments where defensive behaviors must be adopted while he's still learning to handle conflict. It can damage his self-image, his ability to form trust in a relationship, his view of people with demographic characteristics in common with his accuser, and his view of people in positions of authority. But let's just for a moment imagine that as long as these things only happen to men, they're not a problem, as feminists seem to think. When a false accusation is made, the accused is obviously the primary victim. But what if, prior to the accusation, he was a married father with children? Imagine losing contact with your dad, not because he left, not because your mother kicked him out, but because he was taken away by the state based on somebody's lie. Would the unfairness of the situation exempt you from the documented effects of growing up without his nurturing influence? How might the knowledge of having been wronged that way affect a kid's social and psychological development? If the wrongly accused man is killed and leaves behind a grieving family, does their pain and the trauma of their loss vanish if you answer it with, "But my rape victim's lived experience"? And what if, prior to the allegation, he was the breadwinner for his family? When a man is wrongly incarcerated, loses his job due to damage to his reputation, or is disabled by psychological trauma following his ordeal with malicious prosecution and false arrest, his family is deprived of his support. Take that support away, and the lives of the whole family now have to be rearranged. If his wife was a homemaker, now she will have to go to work, whether she has job skills or not. If she was a working mom, now her earnings have to support a family she was previously just partially supporting. This could mean a significant reduction in their budget, depriving the whole family of the lifestyle the parents organized their lives around achieving and preserving, a factor our society has laws to preserve for women and children following a divorce, but which is apparently completely unimportant in the wake of a lying woman's tears. If the victim's wife cannot make enough money to support the family on her own, they may end up relying on social services at the expense of your tax dollars, making your budget collateral damage in the wake of his ordeal. That's not the only bill you're footing on behalf of the false accuser. Who pays the salaries of your local police forces? You do. Who pays for the construction and upkeep of detention facilities? You do. Who pays for the operation of your local courts? Yup, that'd be you again. If the accused cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to represent him. Guess who pays that bill? Hello, taxpayer. Judge's salary? Bailiff's salary? The guards who see everyone through the metal detectors as they enter the courthouse? The pittance the jury gets during a trial? The pay received by the janitor who sweeps up and empties the trash at the end of the day? That's all on your dime, all adding up a bit more with every case, including those that never needed to happen because the accusation was a lie. If at long last a victim of wrongful incarceration is released and is compensated as well as the state allows for the damage his imprisonment has inflicted on his life, that at least is paid for by the accuser, right? Nope. That comes out of the taxpayer's pocket, too. This isn't information that has been hidden, nor is it difficult to figure out or to find. It isn't that feminist advocates lack access to examples of the effects it can have within their communities when someone lies about being the victim of a violent crime. They're just disregarding that information in order to call the phenomenon harmless. They're willing to sacrifice the welfare of not just the victim, but the women and children around him, and even society in general, all without ever admitting the damage that is done. It kind of makes you wonder what they'd accept as evidence of harm. Tune in to HBR Talk this week as we discuss the phenomenon of feminist callousness toward, well, everyone and everything that is touched by the effects of a woman's false allegation of intimate partner and sexual violence. Hello and welcome to Hannah's mute button doesn't work. No, welcome to HBR Talk 100. Lies are harmless. False. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with She Who Must Be Obeyed, Karen Strawn, and Nonsense Annihilator, Lauren B., to shine a big honkin' spotlight on the shady narratives feminists have been using to excuse false allegations and their promotion of policy that facilitates them. But first, as usual, we've got a couple of things to go over. If you haven't already, you need to head on over to badgerfeed.com and register to receive notifications. Give anti-male narratives the finger by stalking our feed. If you want to support our work despite the latest adpocalypse and everything else that gets thrown at us, feedthebadger.com is the most stable way to help. So remember, information is power and we have it. Go to Badgerfeed for information and feed the Badger to help us share that information. And speaking of sharing information, don't forget to smash that like button and share us on every social media site you use. Grab some popcorn, throw open the gates of reason, and unleash your friendly neighborhood badgers on Normie Society. We wouldn't want to be accused of withholding valuable information now, would we?
You know, we really wouldn't. And that's why I actually want to plug a blog called datagoneodd.com. And in 2015, this blogger uploaded an essay examining, it was a study done by, it's called the Making a Difference study, and it was done by EVAWA International, or EVA International. So Ending Violence Against Women, End Violence Against Women International. And in order to do the study, they gave police agencies who qualified a bunch of training. And the training materials, he actually looked into the training materials. They found a 7% false report rate. Okay. 7%, not 2%, 7%. But, okay, here is what they essentially told the officers, and I'm quoting from his paraphrasing on his blog post. A rape report can only be classified as false after a thorough fact-based investigation. A confession that the report was false is not enough. Don't ask the same question twice, so they can't change their story. Even if you find key parts of their story to be false, don't pay too much attention to it. Challenging the validity of their report could be devastating. And even if you think the report is false, it's really not worth your time to prove that it is. So essentially, with these parameters, They managed to find 7% of the allegations were demonstrably provably false. They claim that this 7% false report rate is very low. And he says, I'm kind of shocked they were able to classify that many using these procedures. I tend to agree with him. So, I mean, we're definitely looking at a problem that is bigger than anyone wants to believe. And we're looking at repeated attempts to minimize the problem, regardless of what research is out there. And, you're sort of looking at this situation where they're literally telling police, don't ask the complainant the same question twice, because if they give you a different answer both times, then you've got a problem, right? And this was probably one of the main sort of architects of the Jian Ghomeshi fiasco, because Toronto Police Services were using this sort of playbook when they were interrogating the three complainants who had a complaint to make against Jian Ghomeshi. They did not, they asked once, did you have any contact with him afterwards? And they said no. And you don't ask again, right? You don't ask, is there anything there that might make your answer change, right? Is there anything in your emails? Is there anything in your text messages that might convince you to change that answer? No, they don't. They don't put any pressure on these complainants anymore. Then it gets into the courtroom, and the entire thing just falls apart because the police weren't actually investigating.
What's crazy is that in any other police investigation, they do ask questions multiple times in multiple different ways. You have to, because that's how you verify if this person is telling the truth. If their story changes, then maybe they're not exactly telling the truth there. So this not asking the question more than once is really just backwards thinking. I mean, how can you?
They even suggested in this training that you should minimize your contact with the complainant. So you should see them as few times or speak to them as few times as possible, just on the off chance that they might volunteer a piece of information that contradicts something that they already told you. Like, this is really fucking retarded. I can't believe that there are cops who are like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. Like, what? What? Don't talk to the complainant. Don't try to get to the bottom. Don't try and, lead them in a conversation that might lead them to remember different details, that they may have not included. You don't want all the information available in order to do a proper investigation. Like, what the fuck is going on here? But this is best practices in Canada right now. This in a lot of police agencies. And so essentially, and then when they say, and the reason they said don't bother you have to investigate it. It has to be a fact-based investigation to determine that it's false. So you have to investigate its falsity to the point where you are 100% certain that it's a false allegation before you can classify it as one, right? But the training materials say, because there is no, because prosecutors have discretion and prosecutors don't like to prosecute false allegations, it's really just a waste of your time. It's really a waste of your time to actually go and reverse engineer the accusation to determine whether it was false, because nothing's going to happen to the complainant anyway. So even in the training materials, they admit that nobody's interested in prosecuting these things, right? And then they say, hey, so don't even bother determining whether it's false because it's just a waste of your time.
And see, we have that same problem in the United States with the falsity issue, because, and this is partly because of the now at least temporarily defunct Violence Against Women Act. It's expired. It needs to be left that way. But of course, feminists are pushing for a renewal of Violence Against Women Act reauthorization. And so, of course, we need to have as many people as possible writing to their legislators, and also specifically writing to Lindsey Graham, because he's sort of the one that's in charge of that, whether it gets put forward again or not. But in any case, we do have an issue of guidance that has been handed down to police departments and prosecuting attorneys' offices and courts through the Violence Against Women Act since 1994, basically saying you can't go after women who have lied in court. You can't go after women who have filed false complaints. You can't go after women who have wasted police time. You can't go after women who have caused serious repercussions in a man's life. You can't go after women who have wasted a huge amount of public money, because the feminist narrative on this is they lied because they were scared. They lied because they were abused. And you have to presume them victims of something, even though they lied. And that's led to a huge amount of expense for people in the United States. It's led to a huge amount of basically sacrifice of men's careers, men's freedoms, men's lives. We've seen, we're lucky more men are not committing suicide over false accusations than actually are. The ordeal is extremely surreal for somebody to go through. And I mean, we have a little inkling of that just from, the Badgers were falsely accused. We were accused of harassing someone we didn't harass. In particular, Allison has faced a false accusation, been essentially wrongfully convicted, even though it was in a lawsuit and not a criminal court. She really didn't have due process at the time that she was accused. And what she went through, while it was not incarceration, while it was not imprisonment, was the public destruction of her reputation in the comic industry, the industry she wanted to get into. Is a pretty shitty ordeal, and it is traumatic, and it is something that makes people suicidal, and it made Allison suicidal.
I think that what most people don't realize is that if some stranger came and dragged you out of your home and dragged you out into into a building that you didn't recognize and threw you in a room and locked the door, right? You would be, not only would you be terrified, but you would be that person would be guilty of a whole bunch of different felonies, kidnapping and illegal forcible restraint and illegal forcible confinement and assault and all of these other things, right?
Battery, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, you're looking at that kind of situation. Now, when you have done nothing wrong and a cop, okay, because if some stranger does that, at least you know that if you manage to get out of that immediate situation, right, the authorities are going to help you. But when it's the cops doing it, they're the authorities. They're the authorities. They're the ones who are supposed to prevent this from happening to you, and they're the ones doing it, right? And so I think it is a surreal thing. I think it really is, because all of the feelings that you would have would actually be amplified by the fact that it's the police doing this. There is a certain legitimacy that they carry in their actions because they are police, right? How do I even fight this?
Well,
how do I deal
terrifying.
with this?
It's terrifying because you don't know. First of all, you don't know if this is a permanent change in your life, right?
Yeah.
This is a situation where you've been accused of a serious crime. The people who are arresting you have no reason to expect that the accuser lied. They are trained to expect that the accuser told the truth. When they show up at your door, they show up expecting to confront a dangerous and violent man. That is the first thing. Like, this is my friend's experience. And I've been there when he has come home. I've sat in the jail waiting with his wife to take him home. after his bail money was paid. And they take as long as possible to process a guy if he's accused of domestic violence because, he's the bad guy, right? He's a terrible person. He hit a woman. Shame on him. And therefore, they don't feel like
they're
really,
not in a
really
hurry.
rushed to get him back out into the rest of society. And this assumption is there the whole time. So the first thing that happens, and this is a guy, right, that's raised by a military man, a Vietnam veteran. He has already got a slightly different view on authority. He has a lot of respect for soldiers and cops, and he also has a lot of awareness that there can be corruption in both professions, and he also has a lot of fear of that corruption that already was present, and now it's amplified by this ordeal that he went through. And people he would normally respect because they personally are not corrupt, but the system under which they are working is. They show up at his door, and they think he's a monster. And that's the way it feels to have somebody you respect, who you want to view you as an innocent person, just a bystander to their job, looking at you as a monster and presuming you guilty of something reprehensible. That is a horrible experience. It's something that tears down your self-image, and it's humiliating. It's as humiliating as finding out that, somebody can see in your windows while you were getting dressed or picking your nose or anything that you didn't want people looking at. It's as embarrassing as being, those nightmares you have where you're naked at school or naked in church or some other public place that you wouldn't want to be exposed in. And you can see that, there's a breaking down of a person that happens, and I've looked at my friend and seen him diminished in personal stature, not necessarily in my eyes as a person, but within himself. He demonstrated a sense of being diminished every time he was arrested. And they wouldn't call it an arrest, you're being taken in for questioning, but you still go into a jail cell. You still stay there whenever you're not being spoken to by the police. You still get interrogated. You still have to ask for your right for an attorney to be respected, and you still have to post bail to get out. So you were arrested. You still have to post bail. You still have to pay them to let you go. You can't just leave. But you're not under arrest.
What?
Seriously. Yeah. And they're allowed to do that. They've been allowed to do that for decades under the Violence Against Women Act.
Unfrickin' believable.
Yeah. And that experience, it is when you get a guy into that place, not just into the jail cell, but into that mental place. That's a caged animal place.
Yeah.
And it's something that changes him fundamentally. People have made fun of me for saying that my friend is disabled by post-traumatic stress disorder after his experience. But I would challenge any of them, to go through the arrest experience that he had one time, not 5 times in the middle of the night by surprise, but one time, and come out of it unscathed. Because I don't think anybody would. I wouldn't.
No. Our criminal justice system is meant to break people down, I can only imagine after going through something like that, you just kind of give up. I understand why people plead guilty to things that they didn't do when you're being, just mentally berated in that way,
Well, and they're trained to browbeat the guy, not get to the bottom of the situation, but browbeat him into a confession.
Right. It's really sad.
It is sad, and here's the thing too, right? Because you hear from feminists all the time, right? It's just, it's so hard to convict a guy of rape. Well, if it's so hard to convict a guy of rape, right? Why are 77% of the exonerations the Innocence Project has brought about men convicted of sex crimes. Why is that? These are wrongfully convicted men, right? That were exonerated because they were innocent and wrongfully convicted, right? So you're looking at this from the situation that, it's so hard to prove. It's so hard to, it's just as it's hard to prove that you've been raped. It's also hard to prove that you haven't raped anyone, right? Particularly when the system is becoming so stacked against defendants. Like I mentioned at the conference, when I was moderating a panel, I forget which one, the American Law Institute has a cadre of about 100, maybe 120 individuals in that organization. That this is a prestigious institute filled with legal scholars, and they want to essentially reform and simplify the U.S. Penal Code, right? So they write something called the Model Penal Code. This is how what we think the law should look like, right? And they want to kind of, I think, probably make things a little bit more uniform from state to state, right? All well and good. Simplifying the criminal law is great. Getting rid of criminal prohibitions against things like witchcraft and sodomy and all kinds of other things, also great. Dueling. Canada recently got rid of dueling as a criminal offense because it just doesn't happen anymore. But you have this situation where this group, it's a minority of the members. They have been pushing for the last several years to get affirmative consent included as statutory within the Model Penal Code, which is the suggestion that this prestigious organization gives to legislators. Here's what we think that the law should look like, right? And we already know that New York and California firmly embraced affirmative consent when it came to adjudicating campus sexual misconduct. That is the standard on campuses in those two states. So we do know that there are legislators who are like 100% behind this bizarre idea of, asking permission before every escalation of a sexual encounter, including reaching out and holding somebody's hand. And that if he hugs her without asking first, and getting a yes from her, he's in violation of the law. And if she escalates that to a kiss without asking him and getting his permission first, then she's also in violation of the law. And they're both a bunch of rapists and sexual assaulters, and they should both go to jail, right? And this is just not how people have sex. And this group within the American Law Institute come right out and admit that they know people don't have sex this way. They know it would lead to overcriminalization of perfectly mundane and ordinary acts that people engage in on a daily basis all over the place without anybody harmed by them, right? But, the reason they want it is to create a top-down change in cultural attitudes towards sex and sexual interaction, right? So they are literally trying to engineer what goes on in your bedroom by using legislation. That is what these people want. Okay? That's control. That's controlling your life. And it has nothing to do with whether anybody is likely to be injured if affirmative consent does not become law, right? That the idea that, there are going to be people who are injured because people are not verbally asking permission and verbally receiving it before reaching out and holding somebody's hand, right? Or leaning in to kiss them on the cheek, and then half an hour later, can I touch your boob? Why, yes, you can. Or you could if I didn't have the driest vagina on the planet right now. Okay? Like, they know that this is not the way people behave. And that most people, the vast majority of sexual encounters, don't happen that way and don't result in injury, right? Or violation of one of the parties. But they want this to be the criminal law. And I'm looking at it and I'm going, this reverses the burden of proof. He now has to put forth an affirmative defense. He can't just not take the stand and force the others, the plaintiff or the complainant and the prosecutor to make their case, right? He can't refuse to testify. No, he has to put forth an affirmative defense. He has to prove his innocence. And people are considering this. Legal scholars are considering this. And this is halfway done in Canada. This is like we're pretty much there.
It's all about power. When you think about it, and it does to a degree stem from the political lesbianism of radical feminists, and it is about controlling men and controlling society at large through the control of female sexuality. And I'm thinking that just from watching the way they're doing things, they're moving toward an eventuality of the definition of rape being any heterosexual sex. Not anything to do with consent, not anything to do with against the victim's will. They may even decide that society is the victim. And couples that choose to have sex with each other will be convicted of rape, and people will not know that it used to be labeled a crime of deliberately using force or coercion to overcome somebody's refusal, somebody's disinterest. And I hate to be that cynical about this push. I don't think it has anything to do with protecting anyone. I think it has everything to do with creating a level of control in society. And it probably is. I would say it's probably associated with eugenics too. But in the long run, it doesn't matter their motivations. What really matters is the effects that it's going to have on the rest of society, and that is criminalization of normal relationships.
Right? Yeah, no, and when they were unable, and they've been trying, and they keep on trying, and and the ALI keeps telling them, okay, well, there's this problem and that problem and the other problem and the wrongful conviction problem and the rampant vulnerability to abuse by false accusers problem and all of this, right? And the overcriminalization problem, and then they go and they say, okay, well, we'll tweak this here, right? And then it just creates 5 more problems down the road. But they try again. They keep trying. It's like they just keep throwing it at the wall, hoping that they're because all they need is one yes vote, right? All they need is one majority yes vote, and it's done, right? So they can keep trying every year at the general meetings, right? To push this through, and they can keep campaigning the whole time, and then it'll be done, right? But they got frustrated just this year, and they went over the ALI's, the council's head, and they went directly to the American Bar Association. And they said, we want you to endorse affirmative consent. And initially, the American Bar Association said, oh, wow, this looks pretty well-intentioned. Yeah, we'll get behind that. And then the no voters at the ALI wrote them a big letter with 150 or 200 signatories saying, yeah, you don't want to back this. This is not something that you want to put your stamp on. Like this is a horrible thing. It's fucking horrible. Right? And then the ABA backed down. Right? But we're looking at this. It is like I have said, right? Feminism is not a pendulum. It is an engine. And it will just keep pushing, right? It needs constant pushback.
And this is one that one of my Twitter followers pointed this out. This is something that needs to be taken down by women. Like, men have every right and every reason to object to the narrative on rape culture, the narrative on consent, the narrative on false accusations, all of these things, because men are the primary victims, men are the primary targets of this. And of course, men are well within their rights to criticize it, to reject it, and to demand that women grow up and stop engaging in this bullshit. But until women actually do grow up and stop engaging in this bullshit, until women en masse write to their senators and say, this is not what we want. We don't want a bazooka to shoot men with. We want to be on equal footing with men. And that means we don't need more power than they have legally, and we certainly don't need to be able to wrong them with impunity. Until women can do that, it won't go away. Because as long as feminists can convince politicians and corporations and charities and lawyers groups and every other authority out there that they speak for us and that they speak for the majority of us, they're going to win. They're going to keep these things in place.
Yeah.
And when they lose a foot here or a little bit of ground there, they'll wait. They'll bide their time. They'll say, well, okay, maybe we have 4 or 8 years of Republicans in control right now. Or maybe the independents have taken control, enough control that this will not fly. But if we just wait long enough, we will get the authoritarians back in position, and we will get what we want. Or
well, and
if we
horrible
talk to the Republicans this way, we can convince them that this will protect their wives and their daughters.
Yeah, the daughters. Yeah, this is the horrible thing about it is that you have this incredible bipartisanship on pretty much every issue other than abortion. Between, when it comes to women's issues, that both Democrats and Republicans can agree that women are victims of, unequal pay, of sexism, of discrimination, of not being taken seriously, of sexual assault, of domestic violence, all of these things, right? I mean, they disagree a little bit in terms of how best to protect women. I think Republicans are more likely to say, to be the ones to say, well, women are actually safest when they're in a stable marriage, and raising their families with the father in the home, right? Whereas Democrats are just more likely to go with the feminist narrative on those things. But in terms of solutions, but I think they very much, it's very easy to convince a traditional man that, women need extra protection, that women should be privileged in some ways. And that women deserve support and all of that. It's just a matter of who it's coming from, who's providing that for these women, that I think is the point of disagreement. So, I mean, when it comes to we had the strange bedfellows here in Canada when we brought in the Swedish model for prostitution. That's what we use. The Swedish model criminalizes it decriminalizes the selling of sex, but keeps criminalized the purchasing of sex. So it's sort of a weird hybrid of lesbian, separatist, radical, feminist hatred of men and wanting to see them punished for the act of purchasing sex, the act of degrading women, with this kind of women are harmed when sex work is a crime, because then when they do get raped or they get robbed or they get beaten or whatever, they don't report it to the police, and they have to work, sort of in the shadows and where it's not safe. And even the law against living off the avails of prostitution, which is the law, that prevents sole practitioners, sex workers, from hiring a bodyguard, because his position is criminalized just because she's the one paying him, and all of these things, right? So, and I agree that that's not good, and we should bring sex work out of the shadows and make it safer for everybody. That means you have to actually make it fully legal. Because if it's not fully legal, it still has to operate in the shadows. These women still cannot operate way out in the open without endangering their clients, without putting their clients at legal liability. So, but we had this sick marriage of religious traditionalist conservatives who don't want sex work to exist at all, but can agree that women who feel coerced by their circumstances or they don't have any other options and get into sex work, that maybe we could not put those ladies in jail, right? It's really the men who are exploiting them for sex who should go to jail, right? Because they're taking the moral stance of extramarital sex and sex for hire and all of that, and somebody's got to pay for that shit, and of course it's the man. Because the women need protection, they deserve protection, right? They're not doing this by choice. What woman would do it by choice? The men are choosing to purchase the sex. The women are forced by their circumstances to sell it, right? That's what's going through the traditional conservative's mind, and what's going through the rad fem's mind is anything to keep the male half of the transaction illegal is a good thing, and yes, also women need protection. So I mean, it's just, we literally had fundamentalist Christian politicians working with rad femmes on bringing in the Swedish model. It was just strange bedfellows, right? Like these are two people that you would never imagine are going to have a point of agreement on anything, and they agreed wholeheartedly on this one thing. Very, very frustrating.
You might want to watch out, Karen. You might give people the impression that women actually enjoy sex too.
Yeah, you don't want to give that impression, no. Because we don't.
There we go.
We don't enjoy sex. It's really just like taking out the garbage or like installing a new pop-up drain in my mom's bathroom sink. It's just a chore. It's just something you gotta put up with.
This is why there has never been any effort by women to prevent female circumcision, because of course if you don't enjoy sex in the first place, why would anybody care if the clitoris is removed, right?
Oh, there you go. Well, you know. Oh yeah, that's totally shades of last week's Twitter.
That's
for
just
me
all
there.
The patriarchy doing that. That's like totally just the patriarchy is forcing this issue on women, and right. It's all your fault, guys. But back to the discussion about the Violence Against Women Act and how this ends up being such a bipartisan thing, and that's very much related to the whole prostitution thing, simply because, and you see this with prostitution, you see this with abortion, you see this with a lot of things. I've been an active part of the Right to Life movement since about 1985. And I've seen a lot of different legislation go through, and most of it, there's efforts one way or another to force the industry to be what its supporters claim they want, safe, legal, and rare. And almost every time a piece of legislation is introduced to basically impose the safe or the rare aspect of it, of that alleged wish, they fight tooth and nail against it. But the people that push those legislations, a lot of those bills are created more to limit access or to limit the incidence, the number of women who are seeking it, things like that. And in a lot of ways, like the information bills are designed to show women, this is what you're actually doing. Are you sure you want to do this? And the intent is to reduce the number of abortions that happen by demonstrating to women, this is what you're doing. Are you really sure you want to do this? And abortion advocates just get enraged by those.
Well,
they absolutely do not want women deciding not to have an abortion because of what the fetus actually looks like, or because of what the risks of the procedure actually are, or because of the fact that it is pain capable at this point in its life and all that stuff. They do not want any limitations that might make the procedure more expensive for the practitioners to do. And coming down from on high in the pro-abortion industry, you get, don't have any kind of requirements for safety, anything like that. Basically because it does make it more expensive. If your facility has to be as safe and as clean and as meticulous and as documented as every other healthcare facility in the country. And so you have both sides. One side's goal is increasing the number of abortions, and they fight legislation that does exactly what they say they want, because that would reduce the number of abortions. The other side is attempting to decrease the number of abortions, and they promote legislation that isn't really so much a matter of, well, we're okay with abortion, but we want this. It's really more, all right, we're going to give you what you said you want because we know it will reduce abortions. And I'm saying this from a pro-life perspective. We get criticized all the time for that, and there is legitimacy to that criticism, although the criticism itself is coming from a place that is equally dishonest. And this is how politics works. Right? That's the naked fact of how politics works, is no better presented in any other place than it is in the abortion debate. Everything is raw and angry and open and impossible to disguise in the abortion debate. They're a lot more subtle about it when it comes to prostitution. And then they're even more subtle about it when it comes to anti-due process activism. And the fact is, rape law activism, domestic violence law activism, none of it is intended to protect people. If it was intended to protect people, they would be pushing for equal treatment in the courts when a victim comes in with an allegation that is airtight, that this is provable. Their sex shouldn't change how the police or the courts handle their situation. And when an accuser comes in with an allegation, the sex of the perpetrator or the accused shouldn't affect how the police and the courts handle that investigation and that hearing. But that's not what they're pushing for. They're pushing for a gendered narrative. They're pushing for, if the accuser is a woman, due process needs to be thrown out the window. And they're pushing for, if the accuser is a man and the accused is a woman, that's a form of retaliation and abuse in and of itself. Don't listen to him. And you have at the other end of it, we're fighting tooth and nail for due process rights. We can't do what abortion opponents do. We can't give them what they want. We can't even give them what they say they want, because they're actually bluntly open about their gendered narrative. All we can do is fight tooth and nail to get women to understand that that power is poison. And it's not just poison, it's poison to their whole society. Mm-hmm. It's poison to you. Like, if you're the accused, it's poison to the accuser, not in as obvious a way, obviously, but it's poison to the accuser, because now the only way she's able to get what she wants, the only way she's able to achieve anything, is to lie about someone, and it's poison to all of society.
Yeah,
it costs you an arm and a leg.
Exactly. And the really sickening thing about it is that it seems like we're just trying to find more and more ways to criminalize people. We just want to cast this wide net so that we can get as many people into the system as possible. It's not about protecting people or keeping people safe. That's not what this is about. This is about, filling the coffers with prisoners so that they can fill their pockets with money. There's no rehab. If these people are all really that bad and we should be trying to help them, but there is no reform. There's no kind of system in place to help these men when they're in jail, so that they can come out and not offend again if they even actually did in the first place. You know, there's just no hope. It's like, just the goal is to get him in jail.
Well, the one thing that I do want to say, we don't really have the same issues with the prison industrial complex here in Canada. I don't think that they do in the UK either, but we're seeing the exact same phenomenon when it comes to these two specific crimes, which is domestic violence and sexual assault, in all three countries, right? So it's not a matter, like, I don't think the profit motive is particularly a big part of this. I think it's a horrible thing, and I think that there shouldn't be such things as private prisons. But I don't think that's what's driving it. What's driving it is this narrative of sexual assault being a gendered crime, and anybody who wants to hear something that'll fuck your head up. I did a video a couple of years ago called "Quandary of Consent," and it talks about how women have a very, very kind of ambivalent relationship with the legal concept of contemporaneous continuous consent, right? So this thing that feminists claim is what is necessary in order for sex to be legal and not criminal, which is ongoing contemporaneous consent, ongoing consent in the moment throughout the entire act, right? Women just, when you look at some of the shit that they read, in the what is the largest genre of fiction out there that outsells all other genres of fiction combined, it is more than half the market for fiction, right? When you look at some of the plot devices in these books, where in some cases the hero actually rapes her, traumatizes her, holds her down. She's left sobbing, curled up into a ball afterwards, right? This happens first chapter of the book, maybe second chapter 2, right? And then by the end of the book, he's convinced her that if you knew me then the way you know me now, you consented, and she forgives him, and it's all great, and they get married, they live happily ever after, and then everything's wonderful, right? I mean, when you can grant consent retroactively, and then you can remove consent retroactively, which is another common trope in these books, and that women relate to these plot devices. They find them titillating and romantic, and they tear jerking at the end. When I'm just so happy, I'm just so moved. Right? When these women can connect emotionally with those characters who are, performing these particular plot devices, I think that they don't even fucking understand what consent means. You said yes. You didn't say no, right? At any time, right? So you said yes, either verbally or physically. You never said no, verbally or physically, right? And when it was done, you were still in a state of consent. And then it doesn't matter whether he called you in the morning or not. It doesn't matter whether later he forgot your name. None of that matters, right? None of that fucking matters. If you said no and you pushed him away and you did all of that and he raped you, and like that frickin' feminist writer on Jezebel or Feministing or wherever the fuck it was, right? Oh, I was too drunk to consent. This was the first time I met my husband. We hooked up one night at a party. I was way too drunk to consent. He totally raped me. And a year later we were married because I was happy with who I woke up next to. And he didn't forget to text me the next day. He wanted to continue seeing me, and it was like he was not Ron Jeremy. He was not some guy that I would never have slept with if I was sober. It just happened to be that our first sexual encounter was rape, and the guy hasn't seen the inside of a prison because I never reported him because I really like him.
Yeah, then that's basically the mentality that is asking our society to let it be in control.
The arbiter of what's
freedom.
Criminal and what's not.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And like and that the effect that has, right? How are men supposed to be able to determine the pathway to a functional relationship in a society where they're not just dealing with the inconsistency of female behavior. They're dealing with law that is based on the inconsistency of female behavior. That is not just unfair. That's outright dangerous. And we're in a situation now where how are men supposed to find a partner that they want to marry? How are men supposed to even trust that they can ever engage in a sex act with a woman?
Or exist in a room with one.
You know, yeah, be alone in a room with one. You can get accused of wrongdoing for not hitting on a woman because you're not attracted to her. I mean, that is essentially the bottom line of the anti-fat shaming movement. How dare you not be turned on by my fat ass?
And if you don't want to sleep with trans women, you're probably transphobic and a bigot.
Is a rotten thing to do to both the men who don't want to sleep with trans women and the trans women that they're being admonished to sleep with. Because why on earth would you want to be with somebody who's only with you because they've been shamed into it?
Yeah.
I mean, what a rotten thing to subject trans women to. You know, as bad as that is to say, well, men, your consent doesn't matter. Shame on you for not consenting to sex with this person you don't find attractive, which nobody would ever say to a woman. But to do that to trans women is predatory. We're just going to use your situation. We're going to exploit your situation, and you can prostitute yourselves for our political perspective by demanding people who don't want you have sex with you. How? Evil. Like, that's downright evil.
Yeah, no, it's just like I when I was commenting on Jordan Peterson's interview with Kathy Newman, you know, she's like, you know, well, trans people and, you know, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, you always hold up trans people, don't you? They're the perfect human shield, the most marginalized and vulnerable, the tiniest minority that there is, right? And the one that's least understood, the one that is least accepted, right? The one that is still struggling, you know, and going through its, you know, all of this stuff, and you get to hold them up in front of you while you say, obey me, or the trans person gets it. You know, or if you don't want to do what I want to do, you're going to have to come through this wall of trans people to get to me. Oh my God, dog, stop it. Both of you. And, you know, but another thing too, another double bind that put men in, right? On university campuses, right? Affirmative consent is usually is sort of the standard nowadays, right? At least in liberal colleges. And so you have to ask before even reaching out and taking her hand or anything, right? You have to ask permission. But otherwise it's sexual misconduct. But if you ask her and it's unwelcome because they have gotten rid of what SCOTUS calls the reasonable person standard, and the standard that harassment has to be repeated, ongoing, and extreme, right, in order to count as harassment. They've gotten rid of all of that. Right now, it's any unwelcome communication. So in order to actually stay on the right side of the sexual assault policies, men have to ask permission. But if asking permission turns out to have been unwelcome, then he's on the wrong side of the harassment policy.
And feminists will criticize Mike Pence for not wanting to be out at dinner with a woman without his wife present. Because this is the type of shit that happens.
Well, but that's not even, I mean, he's not doing it because he doesn't want to be phoned by a woman and end up in jail. He's worried about what rumors might start if he's seen in public at a dinner table alone with an attractive female colleague without his wife there, right? He doesn't want people to think he's maybe having an affair or something like that. That's what his whole thing is. The false accusation thing wasn't even on his radar, right? Other than maybe false accusation of an affair.
But it was the first thing feminists thought of, wasn't it?
Mhm.
It was, yeah.
Yep. Maybe they have a guilty conscience.
Maybe
Thing
they
is,
do.
You know, the thing is, it's perfectly reasonable for a guy to take measures to avoid rumors like that. And it's not just a kindness to himself; it's also a kindness to the women that he works with, because
Yeah.
it is a fact of life that both sexes get shamed for infidelity, both sexes get shamed for disloyalty, and both sexes get shamed for promiscuity. Feminists have fought very long and hard to change that for only women, and exacerbate it or increase it or escalate it for men. And you know, they've really they've succeeded in some ways and failed in others. And they'll use slut shaming just as readily as anyone else if they don't like the person that you're with. In fact, they'll actually use slut shaming against female MRAs by the logic that apparently this is our way of getting a lot of male attention and so on. I mean, they will engage in the same thing. But what has in the end been accomplished by this phenomenon of shaming men for engagement of any kind with women, and then turning around and shaming them for refusing to engage with women, and putting them at risk for false allegations, and shaming them for trying to avoid the risk of false allegations, is they've put men in a position where they're in this nice little box around their feet, and they have no direction that they can step that isn't lava. You can't go anywhere without taking that risk, without knowing that you can get burned. And again, it goes right back to our society is beginning to demonstrate a bit of fear and upset over the reduction in the number of marriages. They're beginning to be upset over the fact, because like men who are married are more reliable employees in some ways. They can't afford to miss work. They can't afford to lose their jobs because they have families to support. We don't necessarily have that same situation with women yet. There's a lot of women who still, contribute to their families they're not the main breadwinner, but they're part of a team of breadwinners for their family. And so they have that same situation. They can't really afford to take a lot of time off. But it's men who are primarily in that position. And, if they don't bring home the bacon, it's their family that is being asked to sacrifice, not just themselves. And so, for our economy, the powers that be, the authorities, the politicians, the business owners, the religious leaders, everybody in those positions, they want more married men. But they're in a situation of discouraging that. They're in a situation where this is going to affect the economy. It's going to affect tax revenues. It's going to affect family structures. And that's going to affect the next generation and the next. And even if someone was going to be callous and careless enough to let this affect men personally, individually, on a one-on-one level, this guy has been sacrificed to the phenomenon of false allegations. We can throw him away. That's okay, and not worry that this is affecting a lot of men. Everybody should be worried about the overall impact on society, because this is actually not just a threat to the guy who's being falsely accused. It's not just a threat to the taxpayer who's funding the circus, the kangaroo court, the false arrest, the false imprisonment, the welfare for the family that it no longer has a breadwinner. It's hitting everybody.
Well, here's some numbers, right, from oh my God, stop it! Jesus!
I have upset the dog.
Oh my God. Okay, I'll be back.
This is Karen's dog's reenactment of a pro-life rally with a pro-abortion counter-protest across the street. shouting back and forth at each other their slogans regarding the issue. And I say this having attended more than a couple of pro-life rallies in my day. And
You're brave. I kind of want to see those in person.
Honestly, I don't do it anymore because it's not effective. And I don't feel like it's a good pathway towards dealing with the issue. I want to see this. I want to see the same thing with that issue as I do with feminism and with gynocentrism and with the legislation that we complain about all the time. I want to see women step up and say, this is bullshit. Stop it. We don't want this. Stop using us as weapons against men. And I don't want to see a handful of women doing it. I want to see an entire community of men doing it, or women doing it. But Karen, go on and say the thing you were going to say before the dogs decided to have their reenactment.
Okay. Each year, this is from saveservices.org. Each year, more than 1 million American children experience the divorce of their parents. About 1/4 of divorces involve an allegation of intimate partner violence. In about 70% of cases, the allegation is deemed to be unnecessary or false. Each year, about 175,000 children are involved in the divorce with a false allegation of domestic violence. In all but 2 states, divorce judges are required to consider allegations or findings of intimate partner violence in the award of child custody. Many of these children grow up in single-parent households with little or no contact with the other parent, placing them at a far higher risk of poverty, child abuse, and a broad range of social pathologies. The annual taxpayer costs for federal poverty programs arising from family fragmentation and fatherlessness are conservatively estimated at $100 to $112 billion.
Oh my God.
By conservative estimates, the U.S. taxpayer pays $20 billion annually to support single-parent families that have been formed by a false allegation of domestic violence. Okay.
I think that's one of the most disgusting things to me about this. I mean, the whole thing is just wrong, but
there are other major costs associated with false allegations. Direct personal costs of divorce and lost productivity. The direct costs of divorce and lost productivity have been estimated to be $14,364 per couple. In 2000, there were 957,200 divorces in the United States. Assuming 1/4 of the divorces involves an allegation of domestic violence and 70% of these allegations are false, then 167,510 divorces are associated with a false abuse claim. Estimated the direct personal costs and lost productivity for these divorces are estimated at $2.4 billion annually. The legal costs of defending oneself from a false allegation have been estimated at $500 million a year. So this is yearly for everybody in the United States who's been falsely accused, just the defense costs. These 2 categories account for nearly $3 billion annually. So we're literally looking at, $23 billion in taxpayer money. That's just for false allegations of domestic violence made in the context of divorce. That's not any other kind of false allegation. That's just that one kind. Costs the American taxpayer and families $23 billion a year.
And this comes out of your pocket if you're an American citizen and you pay taxes, which most men do, and some women do. Men a lot more than women. But not only does that come out of your pocket, but to bring it back to another personal level, you want a community in which you can be relatively certain that most nights you are not at risk of having someone break into your house, and that if someone is thinking about it, they're going to be deterred by the lessons they grew up with. They're going to be deterred by their own ethical outlook and by the law. You want a community in which most of the adults are self-supporting. Most of the adults are not relying on your welfare dollars, and so on. And most of them are able to engage in functional adult behavior rather than childish taking advantage of their neighbors and infringement on their neighbors' personal, property and so on. You want basically a peaceful community. Everything that leads to that relies on children having access to both parents when they're growing up. The damage that is done to a child when the father is excluded from the child's life is documented and significant. And even if nobody cared about the dad, which obviously, as I've said, we do, even if nobody cared about the sacrifice of a human being to the gods of, believe women, even if nobody cared about the immediate tax cost of all of that, you want to live in a community that is filled with personalities impacted by it, both male and female, because it's not just sons that are damaged by the loss of paternal nurturing. Daughters grow up with problems because of paternal nurturing being taken away from them. Both sexes are more likely to get in trouble with the law, boys more than girls. But both sexes are also more likely to have unsuccessful lives in a lot of other ways. They're more likely, if they have their father taken away from them, to grow up and become teen parents. They're more likely to end up on welfare and never have anything better than that, which means they don't get to be middle class. They don't get to have nice cars. They don't get to have reliable stuff. They don't get to have any kind of, vacation experiences or anything easy in their life. They're going to struggle forever because that's what it's like to be on welfare. You take the crumbs, you take what's left, and it can feel pretty lucrative, but the reality is you get a lot better stuff if you earn more money. Mm-hmm. But you can't be in that position if you never learn the level of accountability it takes to get there. So you end up in a society full of people who have been essentially handicapped because their fathers have been attacked by a system that is designed to facilitate predatory lying. I mean, so our whole society is affected by this. So the idea that it's harmless, that brings me back to the feminist attitude in and of itself. Think about the level of entitlement it takes to demand that the welfare of an entire civilization be sacrificed in order to preserve the illusion that your sex never lies.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about narcissism.
Oh, I know. It's like when Bill Burr said, Oprah says, or whoever, The View, they all agree, they know there's no reason to hit a woman. There's no reason to hit a woman. And he's really, like the ego. You don't do it. You don't, he says, I'm not saying you should hit a woman, but there's plenty of reasons to hit a woman. Yeah. Are you levitating above the rest of us?
Right.
Just like you're so moral, morally pure, like you're never annoying. Like the whole idea that, Angry Harry broke it down in a video on sort of understanding rape statistics, where he used the Home Office's claim that only 10% of women who are raped report their rapes, and only 2.5% of rape reports are false. And when he broke down the math, he essentially it is if those statistics are both true, then a man is 495 times more likely to rape a woman than a woman is to lie about being raped. Now, so men are 500 times more evil than women, guys. That's really what that says. If you actually crunch the numbers, men are 500 times more likely to do an evil thing than a woman is. I'm not buying it. I'm not, especially when it's so easy to do it. And when you think, about the one accusation that I brought up on Twitter recently, because it happened in my city, Soner Yasa, who was a cab driver. He was giving these 3 or 4 ladies who were out clubbing a ride in his cab, and they went and lit up a cigarette, and he told them that they either had to put it out or get out of the cab because it's illegal to smoke in a cab. And then they started hurling abuse at him and, that you're going to let us do whatever the fuck we want in your cab, you fucking asshole. Fuck you, right? And then he's pulled over and they were like, we're not going to pay the fare. We'll just tell people that you groped us. Okay. So then they get out of the cab, right? He calls the police because they're running out on a fare, right? And they get out of the cab and they call their friends at the club, and the friends all form this mob. What's going on? Oh, he touched us. He molested us, right? So then you got this angry mob of drunk people on a Saturday night at 1 o'clock in the morning or 12:30 at night, right? Who are all like just working themselves up to beat the shit out of this guy. The cop arrives, takes the girl's statements. They repeat their allegation to him, right? Oh yeah, he touched us. He groped us. And then he says, I have a dashboard camera. So the cop watches it right there and then, and says to these women, he didn't touch you. I looked at the video. He didn't touch you. And then they just kind of, he just let them leave. And Soner Yasa was like, I want them charged with lying to police or wasting police time or something, right? And the cops refused to do it, refused to charge them, right?
Well,
and because that report never made it to a dedicated sexual assault investigator's desk, it doesn't count as a false allegation.
wow.
It's not in the numbers for Edmonton Police Services logged as a false allegation of rape. Because, hey, there was no formal police report taken under oath. These women didn't give a formal statement. And so, hey, but you know how much the cab fare was? $13 Canadian.
This is such a frequent thing that in the UK, it's pretty consistent. Cabs have cameras in them now. The Uber drivers in the Uber forums, they've had discussions of you've got to have a camera in your cab. If you don't have a camera in your cab, you're at risk of this, and especially if you're male. And it's kind of a dumb thing if you ask me, because not the cabbies, they're right to have that precaution, but people believing, women who accuse cabbies of that, what is he supposed to do? Lean over the seat backwards while he's driving?
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty easy to figure out that kind of an allegation is unrealistic at best.
Mm-hmm.
Unless the cab ride took an unusual amount of time, in which case the meter is going to become evidence. Unless the cab ride took an unusual amount of time in a situation where traffic didn't warrant it taking that level of time, there's really no reason to believe an allegation that a cabbie groped anyone. Because usually, I mean, once in a blue moon in an Uber, you end up sitting in the front seat because of how many people there are, but it's almost never that way in a cab. And
I always sit in the front seat if I can.
Yeah.
I've never had a cab driver tell me no. But
they should for their own protection, because they don't know you.
They have cameras now.
Yeah, they have cameras now. But
I get queasy in the back seat, so I usually tell them I would rather sit in the front, and you would rather have me sit in the front
because I'm going to throw up if I sit in the back. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
But the thing is, it's just insane to me that that this many women can get believed making an allegation against somebody who would actually have to contort himself while driving in order to have committed the crime.
Well, and how about this? Okay, so we say that if a woman is drunk or she's had too much alcohol, she can't give consent to sex. But then she can make any number of allegations against a person while still being drunk, and they're totally believed.
Yeah, I know. It's like they're totally believed because, her judgment is unreliable when she's drunk. When it comes to agreeing to sex. But when it comes to shooting her fucking mouth off and saying some fucked up shit that never happened, her judgment is totally, totally fine.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
God.
And
like,
so
I
basically, we attribute drunk women with all kinds of capability as long as the subject matter doesn't have anything to do with sex.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's our society. That's what the world we're living in. It's what we're dealing with, and the solution to this, really, obviously we've stated women need to step up. This really has, and women have plenty of reasons why it would be rational and logical and in our best interests to step up and object to this, and it's something that can be communicated to women. Like, we don't want to live in communities where we have to deal with all of the fallout from this. Even women who don't give a shit about the individual men who are being harmed should be smart enough to figure that out, right? Even women who don't work, don't pay taxes, but rely on a man's income should know that the taxes that he pays are essentially coming out of her pocket too, right? Even women who don't have to deal with any of this stuff still have to go to the store and deal with the people at the store. They still have to drive down the street, and there's other traffic on the street. They're still going to have life interactions with other people in their community, and the fact that those people may have had personality changes growing up due to the fallout from this phenomenon should be enough for women to say, okay, let's put on the brakes. It's time for this to stop now.
Yeah, but instead you have a bunch of women saying, well, the conviction rate for rape is so low, we should make all of these quote unquote reforms to the criminal justice system when it comes to sexual assault, and to make it easier to convict and make it easier for women to be believed and all of this, right? And so it's like we already have a situation where a sexual assault trial does not look anything like a murder trial even. There's just so many more hurdles that the prosecution has to, or that the defense has to jump through. So many more privileges handed to the prosecution in these cases. And so what we're looking at is a situation where we already have a situation in the criminal law in terms of sexual assault that would not be tolerated if you were prosecuting a serial killer, for using these rules. Would not be,
or a domestic terrorist.
Yeah, right. And so, but we do this, for men because women are perceived as the victims of men in this way.
Yep,
and
that's why women, again, those who have figured out just how bad this is for society, those who have figured out that even the women who think that this is good for them are negatively impacted by it. It's really on the women of the men's rights movement. It's really on anti-feminist women to be able to communicate to the rest of the women in the world. This is actually doing you more harm than you think. And here's how, and here's why. Even if you don't give a shit about the men in your life, even if you don't give a shit about your husband, your father, your son, your brother, your neighbor, your friends, your coworkers that are men, you should at least give a shit about that.
Yeah.
And it's terrible to have to appeal to people's selfish nature, but that's the state of humanity. And there have to be at least some women out there who are rational enough to go, you know what, maybe this isn't such a great thing after all if it's doing that. I don't like having, the gun that I thought I was pointing at men in society going off and hitting my foot. Right?
Yeah.
That should be at least enough to persuade some women. The other thing that needs to happen is it needs to be pointed out to the powers that be, the folks that are actually despondent over the problems they're seeing in society, and they don't understand the explanations. You know, we could reduce this phenomenon if we just created or rather eliminated the excuses that stop repercussions from being applied when it's demonstrably proved that somebody's accusation against another person that was stated to police, that was filed as a complaint, that was repeated during the investigation, that was stated in court under oath, is a lie. You know, that should not be exempt from prosecution.
Who was that?
What
was his name? What was his name? Ben Vanderhook or something? Daddy Justice. Do you remember him, Hannah?
Yeah, but not. I remember the name, and I can't remember why.
Okay, so he was he's sort of he actually got assaulted by a lawyer working for the National Organization for Women.
Okay.
Wow. You remember that? Dog, be quiet. He was in the he was lobbying in Congress, I believe, and he was walking down a hallway in the Capitol building or something like that, and filming, because he films everything because he's been falsely accused, so he's always recording. And apparently this lawyer for the National Organization for Women took issue with him actually filming her. And he was like, "This is a public space, and it's perfectly legal for me to film here." And she started screaming about her right to privacy, and then she like whomped him one. But and he got it on camera, and she got arrested and prosecuted for it, which is cool. But anyway, he told me once that his ex-wife was one of the first two women ever to be. Dog, be quiet! Ever to be convicted of perjury for lying in a family court in the United States. The other woman was the woman who helped her lie, a social woman, who helped her lie and falsely accuse him. And they were actually prosecuted and actually did jail time. And but here's the thing. When his ex-wife got out, she went to the court, and the judge just gave her 50. Hey, you know,
and that's
water under the bridge, right?
But the prosecution is actually a good thing. That does need to happen. It's all that needs to happen to start the ball rolling on not necessarily shutting down all false allegations, which I don't think is any more possible than shutting down all of any crime. But in deterring the vast majority of them. Because generally speaking, if somebody's willing to do that, they're willing to do it because they're unscrupulous. They're willing to do it because they don't care what the consequences are to other people around them. They just want what they want, and this is a way to get it. And I think there's also a subset of women, because I've seen this with respect to women who work within the intimate partner and sexual violence victims advocacy industry. That's a mouthful. That was probably rape culture just for me calling it a mouthful. But in any case, women who work in that industry have a tendency to try to convince women around them that they have been abused when they actually haven't. Case in point from my experience, I had a ridiculous accident when I was teaching, in northwestern Ohio. I was teaching photography at the business section of a university that's actually here in Dayton, but has a business outlet up north. And I was on my way there, and I stopped on the highway I was dragging my tailpipe and I didn't know it. I thought I had run over a piece of metal, so I stopped to make sure I wasn't dragging a piece of metal that was going to damage my vehicle. And I went to grab my bag out of the vehicle because I had just chucked my keys into it without thinking. And as I'm doing this, wind from traffic going by blew the door shut. And I didn't get my hand out fast enough, and it shut on my thumb. Shut on the end of my thumb. So it just caught like the last little, like this half circle of half my thumbnail and everything on that side. Shut and latched and locked.
Oh, God.
Fortunately, I had a spare key in my right hand pocket. It was my right thumb shutting the door. My coat's unzipped, so I'm like screaming and yelling, you know, and getting, cause there's semis driving by 3 feet away from me at this point, reaching into my right hand pocket with my left hand to try to get my spare key so I can get my thumb out of the door because I couldn't pull it out. Needless to say, at some point during that ordeal, I broke the end of my thumb. And I didn't realize it was that bad until later. I ended up with a splint on my thumb. And I'm at work now, right? A couple days later, because I couldn't really afford to not go to work, and doing everything using my right forefinger as a thumb, with this splint on my thumb. And I'm the face of this gas station at that point. I was the chief cook and bottle washer, out there making coffee and, you know, making sandwiches and talking to the customers and everything. And this lady comes up to me. And she starts asking me, you know, what happened to your thumb? And she pretty much tried to steer the conversation into getting me to, quote, admit that I'd been in a fight with my husband and he'd broken my thumb. Now, granted, this would be an incredibly difficult... If somebody was going to hurt you and hurt your hand and break a part of your hand, the most likely part would be, like, maybe your pinky finger. They're not going to get a hold of your thumb that easily, and if they do, they're not going to break it that easily. So this, unless you're attacking him. So like what she was suggesting was really unlikely. It was even more unlikely than the accident that I actually had. But she wouldn't believe my story. She wouldn't believe what happened to me because I was a woman with an injury, and therefore a man must have done it to me.
Yeah, see,
and
now,
that level of pressure, right? Now, I knew what happened to me, but imagine this. Imagine that woman was somebody I went to school with. Imagine I hung out with her on a regular basis, right? Imagine I went to a party and I got drunk and passed out. And I woke up and somebody had drawn on me in marker and, you know, maybe messed around with my clothes a little bit. What do you think she would try to convince me of then? Mm-hmm. You know? Or imagine if I was a woman trying to get a divorce and I was complaining to her about the conflicts that I had had that had led to that divorce. And they maybe involved yelling, and they maybe involved fights over money. And all of a sudden, wouldn't those become economic abuse? Maybe times
financial abuse.
Yeah.
Psychological abuse. Emotional
exactly.
abuse. Yeah.
And if there had ever been an instance when I and my husband had laid hands on each other in conflict, it would become he beats you instantly.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah. Even if you hit
no
first.
Question.
Yeah. Now, I bruise really easily. I don't know if
women bruise more easily than men on average too. So it's like this is one of the things it's one of the worst things about the situation is when a woman is beating her man, often she doesn't bruises because number one, she's not as strong as he is. Number two, men just don't bruise as easily. I bruise really easily as well. So yeah. Go ahead.
But I always have a bruise on me, and I'm a little bit clumsy. Like I walk into shit. I'm not very careful with how I move sometimes. So right now I'm looking at a bruise that I didn't even know I had. But, yeah, anyone could look at me at some point and think that I was being abused. Luckily, I live alone, so, there's no one to blame for that. But yeah, people see things and they, in their minds, they make up their own stories, and it's got to be that way. It can't just be, oh, she's just a clumsy person, or, oh, maybe she really did walk into a doorknob. I've done that, But,
I did explain to people not too long ago that I fall down the stairs all the time.
Yeah.
Actually, and I have a diagnosis now, so I can tell people I am actually a pathological klutz, because that is one of the symptoms of the disorder that apparently runs in my family, the connective tissue disorder that runs in my family, because we have less track of our limbs, the position of our limbs in space. But in any case, the thing that I want to point out about this is, so we all have this situation where if we were less scrupulous, if we were less vigilant, maybe we could be convinced to blame a guy for something that isn't his fault, to cross a gray area between, yes, we had a conflict, and yes, he was abusing me, right?
Yeah.
Having repercussions for being the person to push someone over that edge is vital. It should absolutely be a thing that applies when a person who works in that industry manipulates a person into accepting a narrative that is not true. And then that person who accepted that narrative is not unaccountable for doing so. That should be something that they should be advised in when they go into court, and they're going to say, well, my husband was abusive, he was economically controlling me, and all this other stuff. They need to be able to make that decision after being faced with the warning, you can be convicted of perjury if you lie about this. And being an accuser of this type isn't going to stop that from happening to you.
Yeah, and also, if he maybe he kept the money from you, but if he is convincing enough to convince the judge that it was because you were an alcoholic, or you were doing drugs, or you were gambling away the paycheck, or whatever, and this is what he had to do in order to keep the family afloat, the judge is not going to see that as abuse. The judge is going to see you as financially abusing him.
Yeah. And I have no problem for the same due process being afforded to false accusers that is afforded to the people they accuse.
Of course.
I want to see a level of due process for everybody. That is, you don't have action taken against you by the system without proof that you did that which you are accused of doing. I don't want a standard of proof on that. But if that standard of proof is met, the person's sex, the nature of the allegation, the fact that they are backed by an organization for victims, none of that should prevent the penalties from being applied.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And the UK is, they, despite the fact that, they had the big scandal with, withholding exculpatory evidence, and, what's her name, the Crown prosecutor, the chief of the Crown Prosecutor's Office, she had stepped down in shame. She's the first head prosecutor of Britain who is not going to be elevated to the House of Lords, who's not going to be given a title, right? I forget what her name is, but she just absolutely blew it with a believe the victim investigative procedure. She essentially said, that here's how we're going to do things now. We're going to believe the victim. That's how we're going to start our investigations. That's how we're going to prosecute our cases, as we believe the victim 100%, and then she got caught in a scandal. They had to open up every single rape case that had been prosecuted over the previous year or two, and reopen them and look at them, because there were people who were spent 2 years in prison when there was exculpatory evidence in police possession that they hadn't handed over. Right? So you're looking at that, but at the same time, the UK has actually, like, whenever a news story about a false rape accuser who has been prosecuted and convicted, 9 times out of 10, that's coming out of the UK.
Yeah, once they get through all of that other stuff, if they, if it's proved that they lied, then they finally will deal with it.
Yeah.
But
so, and I think part of that is that there's some private prosecution in the UK. So prosecutors know that, particularly if the accused has any means whatsoever, has any amount of money whatsoever, the accused can actually launch a private prosecution, can start a prosecution on his own, and make that happen, pay for that himself. At which point, if it looks like it's going to be successful, then the Crown prosecutor will take it over. But that, like, you actually, as a citizen in the UK, can demand a prosecution and essentially DIY it, and hold someone criminally accountable for wronging you. So
in the United States,
prosecutorial discretion is not the name of the game there.
Yeah, in the United States, it's almost entirely handled through lawsuits, and it doesn't involve jail time. Like, I don't know that you necessarily could sue someone for lying about you to the police, though. And I think there should be some level of recourse that is directly in the hands of the victim of a false allegation, a targeted false allegation. Even if it's just you should have the legal right to file a lawsuit against your accuser, and if you can prove in court that they filed a false complaint with police, that they lied to the police during an investigation, or that they perjured themselves in court in order to support an allegation that was a lie, that should lead to a judgment against that person. Even if the court doesn't go after them. And I'm not a big fan of mandating that the court do anything specific other than they have to turn over all of their evidence to the accused. That a person accused of a crime should have everything that is going to be used against him, should have access to everything that's going to be used against him in court, so that he has an opportunity to engage in a robust defense. But
he should also have access to anything exculpatory.
Right. Well, everything that could be used, I should say. Everything that could be used in his favor, too. All of the evidence. And then, of course, he has a right to his defense, and he should have full right to call witnesses and all that. Those are the things that are mandated in the Constitution. But I don't like mandatory prosecution of any kind. I don't like mandatory arrest policies of any kind. I don't like mandatory sentencing. I don't like 3 strikes and you're out policies. None of that is fair to the civilian, and it all ends up catching people in a net intended to get hardened criminals. It ends up catching people that shoplifted 3 times, or shoplifted once and jaywalked twice. So these are things that are I don't want to turn around and say, well, except in this one case where I'm not happy with the outcome, it should apply. No, I across the board, I'm against sort of mandating that kind of thing. But I do think that an individual who has been denied their due process should be able to go up against the court and say, hey, you handled this case badly. I think a person should should have some recourse to hold the court, the police, the prosecutor, everyone involved accountable if they're mistreated, if they face a false allegation, if crimes are committed against them, and they've been prosecuted under laws related to those crimes, but the individual who wronged them is just let off. I think the individual should be able to initiate something themselves there, and that's how we hold them accountable instead of having a blanket law. Like a lot of our system deals with things with blanket laws, and it's not really helpful.
Yeah, Sonar Yasa sued his false accusers, and he actually got a. Although I think that there's an NDA involved because the full video of the dash cam footage, right, was taken down from his channel on YouTube. So I think that that was done as part of the settlement agreement, that he take that down and they'd pay him some money. But it's not a great outcome. It's certainly, I wouldn't necessarily call it justice, but it's at least something.
More than $13, I hope.
Yeah, I hope so too. Nobody who reported on it disclosed how much it was, so I'm guessing that was under an NDA as well.
Yeah,
probably. And a lot of times those agreements or those or not findings but rulings by the court are kept that way. I mean, if you sued somebody and you won a significant amount of money and your name was going to be reported and people could find out where the person who had all that money was, would you want people to know how much you got?
Yeah.
I think really 90% of the time it's actually, if it's a settlement, it's the defendant does not want the public to know how much they had to give you to make the matter go away.
Well, there is that as well.
The more money that they had to give you, the more likely people are to view you as, or the defendant as, having done something wrong, right? And so that's usually why, and things like the Weinstein, Harvey Weinstein settlements with the women who sued, or they didn't sue him, they filed lawsuits or threatened to file lawsuits and then settled. But they had broad non-disclosure agreements. Some of them were so sweeping that these women weren't even allowed to discuss the matter with a spouse or a counselor.
Okay.
Right? So, you're looking at something like he's trying to cover his tracks and he's like, I'll give you $500,000 if you don't say anything about any of it ever, including how much money I'm giving you to shut up.
Some of those agreements, they're tantamount to blackmail. Especially if the person has done something, but the individual is accusing them of something much worse. Like that video that we saw a while back, the woman who released the video, oh yes, he sexually harassed me, and then you watch the video, and early in the video he says, can I flirt? And she says yes. Maybe she was in a position where she didn't feel able to say no, but she went into that position with a camera knowing that was the situation. So she went into that position intending to get video of that. And so it's very hard for me to call that a non-consensual encounter. And it's very hard for me to call what he did harassment in that instance, because she went in to collect that, and she gave him verbal permission to do it. And it's very much more a gray area. So you get somebody that gets a guy in that position and says, I'm going to come out and say that you sexually harassed me. Well, what people think of when they hear sexual harassment is the drooling, unattractive, overbearing, overzealous, powerful boss chasing his poor, innocent secretary who looks like Miss Booksley from the Beetle Bailey comic strip around the desk.
Yeah, or Dolly Parton from 9 to 5.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, she screams and cries and says, no, I just want to take notes from your latest meeting. Stop touching me. And that's what people have in mind. They don't picture stuff like that gray type of situation where no boundaries are communicated, and it's very difficult to attribute boundary violation as a deliberate predatory act on the part of the individual who's being accused.
Mm-hmm.
And they can get millions of dollars out of a guy by basically communicating to him without being that blunt about it, but communicating to him, this is what people are going to think of you if you don't pay me this money and I talk about this.
Yeah.
And while it is absolutely idiotic and wrong for anybody to try to overcome somebody's boundaries against their will like that, like, again, who really desperately wants to acquire fake affection from somebody who doesn't want them? Like, what kind of person really wants that? Somebody who's very broken, right? So it's obviously a wrong behavior. But at the same time, when you're in a situation like that, where it's kind of... there isn't that level of communication, so it's not a black and white issue, and it's not a deliberate contravention of a refusal. It's really ridiculous for somebody to be able to blackmail like that. And it is blackmail when you get that kind of money to not talk about something like that, knowing that society is going to view it in those black and white terms.
Exactly. I think this is why, I do agree with you when you say that women have to get together. We have to, voice our opinions against these laws. I just don't see that happening. What I think would be more effective is if, the victims of false rape or for any kind of false allegation, if they go after the person who made the false allegations against them and those cases were prosecuted, I think then you would see a change. If women knew that you can't just get away with making this false claim, then they wouldn't do it. If they knew that there was threat of jail time, I don't think they would be so quick to just flippantly point a finger at a man and accuse them.
Well, hell, if they knew there was threat of being sued, if they knew that they could threaten somebody with public humiliation, and the person could turn around and say, "Oh yeah, well, guess what? I'm going to sue you now because you lied about me. Goodbye to your house. Goodbye to your car."
That'd be nice. I mean, I think there's a... Stop it, dogs. There's a big elephant in the room here, and it's there's got to be... There's got to be a reason why this particular crime is on Moa's top 10 list of ways to stay on God's good side, right? Okay? It's one of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not bear false witness.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That
Specifically
was
against thy neighbor, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Like, we hear thou shalt not lie all the time, right?
A member of your community.
Thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not lie about another person.
Yeah.
It's very specific.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're talking about something that I think 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, everybody knew was a threat to community cohesion, to social cohesion. It was an absolute threat. Lying about other people to get them in trouble, right? To get them stoned to death or thrown in a river.
Or forced to marry you against their will.
Well, I mean, that wasn't about rape, though. That was...
No, but it could still be... It'd still be a hell of a... Imagine being saddled with somebody for the rest of your life, that the way they got you saddled with them was to lie about you.
Yeah, well, there you go. But, I mean, essentially, the forced to marry you, the kids in the hayloft. That was really what that's about. I left a comment on Reddit ages ago going through the language that was used to describe the act in that particular verse, right? And how it differed from... basically, if a woman is in the city and she is with a man and she doesn't cry out for help, then we know she was committing adultery or whatever, and therefore she gets stoned to death too. You take both of them out and you kill them, right? If a woman is in the countryside where no one can hear her, even if she did cry out, we're to assume that she did cry out and there was no one there to hear her, and we believe her and her honor's intact and the guy gets killed, right? But if somebody comes across two people in the countryside together, right, and catches them in the act, then she'll be. So it's really, and they used a different, they used the word for seizing, because they didn't use the word rape, they used seized. But they used a version of the word seized that was used when Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph, right? She seized him, using that particular word, right? So this is obviously about seduction. This is obviously about two kids. You know, she has to be unmarried and unbetrothed, and they have to be caught together, and all of that. And so it's like, yeah, that's essentially describing a shotgun marriage. You broke her, you bought her and she wants it because she willingly lay down with you. Right? And so you have to, that's why you pay compensation to the father and not, right? So, and her dad could have made a better marriage for her other than your dumbass, right? So this is like, we really have this misunderstanding of, an intentional misunderstanding of even ancient laws that surround sexual activity. You know, this whole idea that women were forced to marry their rapists. Well, not under the law. Maybe there were parents who did that, who coerced or pressured their daughters into marrying a man who raped them. Maybe there were, using that law, that Bible verse, but that's not what that Bible verse said, right? And it's the same with the laws on rape in India. That where they 56% of the allegations of rape that come across investigators' desks pertain to consensual sex between unmarried people. The very people being stumbled across in the field in that Bible verse, right? And she decides that now that she's pregnant, or now that the neighbors are starting about her, now she wants to get married. Right? And she brings his parents won't let him do it. And so she brings the rape charge in order to coerce marriage out of him. And then, wouldn't you know it, the vast majority of these cases are resolved by the two parties, the rapist and his victim, getting married, because it wasn't actually a fucking rape. But how much do you want to bet in 10 years, feminists in India are going to say, just 10 years ago in India, women were being forced to marry their rapists? Mm-hmm. Like, this entire, like, what the fuck kind of nightmare sex attitudes do women have? Right? That all of this is okay. That we can call a man who is being forced to marry a woman because he had consensual sex with her, and now she's changed her mind about being single. And so she brings a rape charge against him, and he's forced to either marry her or go to prison. And she's the fucking victim.
It's a pretty helpless attitude.
She's the one who was forced to do something.
This is another issue.
To marry her rapist.
This is another issue that, and we've brought it up before, and I'll be bringing it up again. You know, because it's not something that we can't really we can just ignore. Our society has a habit of presuming women victim of their own choices. Mm-hmm. Reproductive issues is probably the most blatant and obvious area of that. I mean, you can have a woman who, she is the gatekeeper of sex to start with. So if she says no, it ain't happening, right? Unless the guy is actually a rapist, in which case she has recourse against him in a court of law. So either way, she has the right to refuse. Society is not going to criticize her for refusing. They'll criticize him for refusing. You know, what's wrong with that guy? He doesn't want that woman. They'll even criticize her for refusing if she's unattractive. There is no doesn't matter had sex meme for women, but there is for men, right? So that's her starting point. That no is her starting point. That's her first right. Second right is, who? I get to decide who. I can be picky if I want to. I can choose to only have sex with a guy who wants to have children with me, or is on board with using a condom to prevent that, or has had a vasectomy or whatever. So you have two choices there. Third choice, is she going to use birth control of any kind? Fourth choice, which birth control is she going to use? Is she going to use more than one thing? Because she can. She can use hormonal birth control. She can use barrier methods. She can use spermicide. She can combine all three together. She can use an IUD that is sort of an abortive type of. There's two different kinds. There's IUDs. There's intrauterine devices that are hormonal birth control, and there's intrauterine devices that are abortive. And then if she gets pregnant, despite all of these choices, she also has the choice to use an abortifacient. She has the choice to have a surgical abortion. If she gives birth, she has the choice to use safe haven abandonment. She has the choice to relinquish custody to the father if he wants it. She has the choice to ask for help from her family. She has the choice to go for adoption if she and her husband, her guy, I shouldn't say husband, if she's not married, but if the father doesn't want custody and she doesn't want custody, and they're both willing to give up the child for adoption, she has the choice for adoption. Or if she decides to go to Utah, she can do it without his consent and get away with it. So she has all of these choices. She doesn't ever have to. In the United States of America, a woman does not have to become a custodial parent who is a single parent. She never has to become a welfare mom. She never has to become an individual who is beholden to a helpless child that she cannot support on her own. But what do we do when a woman puts herself and her child in that situation? Who do we blame? Who do we call the deadbeat? The father. The man.
Oh, yeah.
She's
no,
the victim of all of those dumb choices that she made. And he has to pay.
Oh, even if he's a victim of her criminal act. Even if he was 13 and she was 30. You know, and she went to prison for it, right? And then got out and got custody of her sister or whatever, and then goes on welfare. Will force that kid to pay, right?
Even if he's not legally old enough to work. There is one case, and I haven't found much about it online, and a lot of what I had found is gone now, and I think it's probably because of the privacy of the victim, but an 11-year-old boy was ordered to pay child support to the woman who raped him and conceived a child with him. 11 years old. You can you can have a paper route at 11 years old if your mom's willing to drive you around when it rains.
There was a case in, I think it was California, and a female DA, whatever, for the district, right? When she was asked about whether it was actually fair for this statutory rape... Stop, dog! The statutory rape victim to have to pay child support to his rapist, she said he wanted to act like a man then. Now he wants to be treated like a child.
Oh my God.
Yep.
In public, she said this. In front of news cameras, she said that. I will fucking kill you. Stop it. Leave each other alone. God damn it.
Jeez. It's just so a woman can go through that whole series of choices, even in a non-criminal situation. She's not a victim. If she commits a crime, she's certainly not a victim, but she'll be labeled a victim of those choices. She can be taken seriously playing victim of those choices, and she can be taken seriously transferring accountability for the position she put her child in to the man.
Well, and
even if she knew when she had sex with him that he didn't want to be a dad.
Oh man, this poor kid, right? Who was having his $50 a month from his paper route garnished the moment he turned 18 to pay the back child support, up, that he owed from when he was a kid. And it was all because welfare was coming after him for it, because she got out of prison, she got custody, and she got welfare. This kid, up to then, didn't even know that this kid existed, that his child existed. He had no idea she had his baby or whatever, right?
Didn't even know he was a dad. Didn't get any opportunity to be a dad.
Yeah, and you know what? He had to go and apply in court at his expense for any kind of access or custody rights. And she got a free legal aid attorney because she was a welfare mom to fight him for it.
Yep. And, of course, if you go to fight that, you go to fight, for a law that says if a child is conceived during an act of rape, the rapist shouldn't have custody. The law will then get applied to situations where an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old conceived a child together in the back seat of a car in a consensual act that the 18-year-old shouldn't have been involved in because the 15-year-old is too immature, and not necessarily to situations where a 30-year-old female predator preyed on a teenage male who was not mature enough to make that decision. And it's a ridiculous situation. That was actually, I've seen that done in a couple of states where there's a law now. If you conceive a child by rape, you cannot have custody of that child. If you're convicted of rape for the act that conceived the child, and it keeps fathers away from their children, but it's not getting applied to female statutory rapists.
Of course
it's not getting applied to women who forced men to have sex with them against their will. And of course, the rape victim, when the victim is a man or a boy, is liable for child support.
Yeah.
Because it's the child's right, even though the mother's the one that collects the money and spends it and decides what the child can and can't have.
Yeah, without being held to account for how she's spending that money. There's no regulation on how this money is spent. This woman can spend this money on new clothes, new makeup, or whatever, just to seduce a new man. None of this money can go actually to the child, and
she will face no repercussions.
Exactly. Tax-free money. She pays no taxes on this money. This is just a fucking gimme. And it can go however if she wants to put it up her nose, she can do it.
Yeah, and one of the things too, right? I mean, this isn't a new problem. My ex, when he was living in Calgary, he was managing an apartment building, and a local nonprofit approached him and said, "We'll pay you. We've got this program where we want to recruit some people from within the community and get them to take these welfare moms grocery shopping and show them how to actually buy food that is nutritious and, not just pure sugar and pure salt and all of that, and stretch their budget and essentially what I did with my friend when she came back from Idaho with a 4-year-old pregnant with another child and had to go on welfare for a while, right? And she was like, how am I going to feed us on $300 a month that's left over for food? And I was like, oh, honey, you come shopping with me and I'll show you how, right? And because I'd been living at or under the poverty line for like 15 fucking years by that point. So, and we didn't eat ground beef very often. We ate steak quite a lot. You just have to know how to shop. But he tried this for a month with a bunch of the women in his building, right? These are single moms on welfare in his building. And then he quit. He said the extra money wasn't worth it. Like, they paid me to do this. And these women were so completely recalcitrant, right? They didn't want to go to the produce department. They didn't want to go to the meat department. They did not want to buy in bulk. They did not want, it was all just impulse shopping the entire fucking time, right? So you go to the grocery store, you see a bag of chips, you throw it in the cart. You see a case of pop, you throw it in the cart, right? And that was how they shopped, right? They never planned ahead. They didn't even want to hear about how meat is priced per kilogram. And so you can tell whether it's a good price by looking at the price per kilogram, not the price per package, the price per kilogram. and didn't want to hear it. No. Why would I be cooking meat anyway when there's all these TV dinners here?
Yeah,
Yep.
hamburger.
Oh gosh, he was lucky. He had women that were buying food with their food stamps.
Yeah, I guess, eh?
Well, you got to understand. I got a friend who teaches in the Dayton public school system. And one day she just made me cry. I don't know how else to describe it. We were talking about the damage of the welfare system and the damage of fatherlessness in the local community, how it's hit here locally. And I mean, it is ugly here. You know, there are beautiful, wealthy neighborhoods in the Dayton metro area, right next to places that you can't go into if you're the wrong color or you will be shot. Right next to places where the neighborhood where I took the homeless lady home was one of these. I haven't told this one in a while, so I can probably figure there's some people who haven't heard it in the audience, but I had a lady sort of game me regarding her waiting around until there were no buses anymore, in order to maybe try to get somebody whose vehicle she could sleep in for the night. And you know, she guilt tripped me, and I bought it when I shouldn't have. And so I went to give her a ride home. She was a couch surfer. And of course, the first two people that we went looking for weren't there. Get to the third place, and she passed out in my van. And I went inside looking for the person that was gonna help her, the one that she had named. And immediately, two very large older men came over to me and said, "You can't be in this neighborhood, ma'am. You'll get killed. You can't be in this neighborhood." And you know, I'm in my work uniform. So you can see the name of my employer, that I was a retail worker. I wasn't, you know, upper class or anything like that. I just had the wrong color of skin. And they wouldn't leave my side. The whole time I was there, those two men acted as my bodyguards.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't walk away from me, not 10 feet. Called the cops and actually said, "You have to come get this white woman out of this neighborhood. She won't leave." Because I wouldn't abandon this passed out woman in my van. I wouldn't throw her out on the street. I couldn't do that to a person. And eventually, they went and got her out of the vehicle and brought her into the building, took her into the lobby, put her on the couch, and stayed with her so I would go. And one of the things that they told me was the reason that I couldn't find any of the women whose apartments that she usually slept in was because it was the beginning of the month and the welfare checks had come out and they were all at the bars getting drunk.
Oh, God, yeah. No, we had this situation, too. I worked for...
Well, there's more. I'm talking about this story, and I
Okay.
was talking about the effects of fatherlessness and how a lot of these women, these guys were telling me, you know, they leave their kids home alone, go to the bars, get drunk. My teacher friend said, "I have students in my class that when I hand out treats in class, they wrap them up and put it in their pocket for later because it's the only thing they're going to get to eat that day. Not because they're not getting help, not because their family is not getting help, but because their mothers take their food stamps and trade them for cash, trade them for cash from other people, their food stamp cards, and go out and get their hair done and their nails done. Not even drugs, right? Not even addicts, not even alcohol, not even drunks, getting their hair done and their nail done at the expense of their children's nutrition."
God.
And that is what's going on here in Dayton, Ohio.
Well, and now that we've completely vindicated Tommy Sotomayor and his commentary on certain women doing certain things, we had the same problem, like working in a Chinese restaurant in a small town. third Wednesday of every month, that was when, you were going to just get slammed. And it's like, if you couldn't afford Chinese food yesterday, you can't afford it today. Just because you got your money today. Like, how does that even work? Like, how do these people have no idea that, you're being paid on a cycle, right? And if you ran out of money before your next check, and then you get your next check, that doesn't mean that now you have a bottomless pit of money. If you spend like you spent last month, you're going to run out of money before your next check again. Like, does nobody, like, you know what I would like to see? I would like to see a mandatory training program for people when they apply for welfare.
Well, I mean,
when they apply for welfare, let's take you out. Let's show you how to shop. Let's show you what you can afford to buy.
They used to teach these kind of things in high school. It was a class called home economics.
Yeah, well,
and it's now gone.
Here's what happens in those classes now, okay? Because I was in one of those classes where they offer you advice because you are receiving some form of public assistance. And I was like, I'm going to get all kinds of advice from my family, and it's good advice. And I probably am not going to learn anything in this class, but I'm not going to be upset about being in here, because what if there is something they know that the rest of my family doesn't? Right? That was going to be my attitude, was like, let's see how much I already know. Let's see how consistent they are with the things my family has said. And let's see if they can give me information I don't already have. First out of the chute, right? I sit down in there, and there is a woman across the table waiting for the lady to come in and teach this class. And it was a simple parenting class. It wasn't like everything about parenting. It was a set of pieces of information regarding resources and how to use them the most effectively, and safety issues, and some resources that are available to help a parent mitigate the threats that a child faces during early childhood. So it was valuable information. She was offended. She was pissed. She was shaking with rage. And when the lady that came in to offer the information to the class, it was a mandatory class. She comes in, and she sits down at the head of this table, and this woman across from me, who is barely out of her teens, who couldn't even dress appropriately for the weather that day, so she was also uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable, who looks sullen and angry and has her fists balled up and is ready to bite the head off the nearest person, doesn't even give her a chance to speak before she starts cussing her out for having the audacity to make her sit through a parenting class, and how dare anybody tell her how to raise her children, her kids. She knows what she needs to do, and this is unreasonable, and fuck all you guys. And she got kicked out of the class for basically disrupting it. And there will be someone like that in every single one of those classes. And there will be someone like me in every single one of those classes. I was trying to figure out already, the moment that I applied, all right, how can I minimize how long I'm going to be doing this? I don't want to be dependent on other people. I want to be able to take care of my family. I'm an adult, right? This is embarrassing. And I'm grateful for everything that I can access, but I paid into this system to help people who were in worse shape than me, not to become one of the people that uses it, right? And there I am across the table from an ungrateful, mooching bitch, and it just blew my mind. But that's what you get in that situation, and you will see more of her than you will of me as you go through that type of program. You will see more of that woman, and fewer of the women who just need a leg up for a while because they made a series of bad choices, and then had a car accident on top of all of those bad choices. And so there's a recovery period before you can go back to work and all that stuff. But having the government try to tell people how to live, at either end of that, it doesn't really work out. We really need to get our communities back to a situation where your mother is giving you the advice you need in order to be a good parent. And your father is giving your brothers the advice they need. And your parents are telling the opposite sex kid, this is what you should be looking for in a partner. This is how to handle it when your opposite sex child goes through this or that. This is when you should step back and let the parent that's the same sex handle the situation. And those are things that you can't get from your government. I mean, your government can try to provide them, and there might be a sprinkling of people that'll benefit from it. But the vast majority of time, it's not really going to solve anything. It's just going to be viewed as an imposition. And I hate to say this, and I hate to be. I'm not condemning people for being poor. I'm condemning people for wallowing in it, and for treating it as a lifestyle, and for blaming everyone around them for their choices, and for being ungrateful when they are offered help out of it, and instead using that as a lifeline to keep their heads just far enough above water that you can breathe through your nose without inhaling too much of the sea. That's just not it. Government's not a solution to that. It's part of the problem. And it's just like it's a main part of the problem in the main topic of this conversation. We would not have a phenomenon like we do now of false allegations being used in custody battles, and false allegations being used to get a leg up at work, false allegations being used for attention, and false allegations being used for revenge. We wouldn't have any of that going on if we didn't have laws that facilitate that. If we didn't have laws that rewarded it, right? We would have, for the most part, a very minimal number of people making false allegations and getting nowhere with them for the most part. And that's it. And instead, we have this massive problem of women exploiting a system designed to protect people from abuse as a tool of abuse.
Yeah, well, and social media doesn't help either, right? I mean, Tim Hunt hadn't even got off the plane. His wife had already got from, I think it was the London Institute or something like that, London College, saying if he doesn't step down, we will fire him. And that was all based on Connie, whatever her name. What was her name? Connie?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, no, but she was a science journalist who tweeted that, he was in South Korea and at a conference on science journalism, and he was asked to give an off-the-cuff toast at a luncheon, and he did. He said, the problem with women in science is, you fall in love with you fall in love with them, and they cry when you yell at them. And but blah blah blah. Women, great. Women scientists are great, and I believe, and I wish women in science every good thing, despite the deplorable behavior of dinosaurs like me. Right. So it's all just a self-deprecating joke. And it was also based on how he met lab, and apparently he made her cry and he fell in love with her. So it was just and it was greeted with laughter. Everybody laughed. Connie St. Louis.
Yeah.
She tweeted that he made this joke and it was greeted with stony silence, and it was so sexist. and it was so derogatory and denigrating of women in science. Okay. And then by the time he got off the plane, his wife was phoning him in tears saying, "You've been fired from London College," or whatever it was, right? University College London, or the London Institute, or whatever it was, right? Everybody is calling for your blood, right? You're all over the media.
Jeez, yeah.
Yeah. And you know, what on earth did you say? And for a while, for a brief time, the recording of what he said was available to listen to online. Right? And I listened to it, and it was a self-deprecating, tongue-in-cheek joke, no different from me introducing Philip Davies as a conservative MP, you know, who's a horrible misogynist and a male supremacist and all of this stuff, right? So it was just a joke. Everybody
ridiculous
laughed.
Manifestation of cancel culture.
Yeah,
basically.
everybody laughed, and this fucking woman lied, and he moved to Japan.
Yeah.
He's a Nobel laureate.
Wow.
Right? He had to move to Japan to find a job, right? Where he would not be harassed and treated like shit, and treated like some kind of pariah. And Connie St. Louis? Oh, well, when it was discovered that she lied extensively on her CV, because she's a professor of, I don't know, freaking journalism at some freaking school, right? When her online CV contained a number of falsehoods, and what happened was the CV was pulled down and amended and put back up, and she still has her job, and there you go.
Women are protected from accountability for their choices.
Even
this is the
women
biggest
who
problem
look,
in our society, facing our society right now.
Even women who look like warthogs.
Yep. But this is
Okay,
really the
because
biggest problem we
just
have in our society right
Google
now.
Connie St. Louis and have a good look.
Okay.
Okay, because she's
That's
not using
fine. But this
she's
is
not
an
using-
important point.
She's not relying on thin privilege, and she's not relying on look privilege.
No, she's relying on I have a vagina.
Yeah.
I have a vagina, therefore I can't be accountable for anything I do. And other people are accountable for my feelings. Our biggest problem in society right now, pretty much across the world in some ways, is that we have geared our civilization around protecting women from the consequences of their own choices.
Yeah, removing burdens
Protecting
from
women from accountability for the consequences of their own choices. And we've done this to the degree that we prevent women from being held accountable for the consequences other people face when a woman makes a bad choice. And we even have legal safety nets. Like safety nets in our law and our policy and our businesses and our schools and all of our institutions intended to protect women from accountability for the consequences of their choices, even when those consequences impact other people. You can trace everything that is wrong in the United States today, in Canada today, in the UK today, even things wrong in the healthcare system. A lot of it traces back to our protection of women from the consequences of their own choices. Protection of women from accountability. That is the thing that needs to be fundamentally addressed in all things. We cannot have any segment of the population that is adult, that is capable of being accountable, that is capable of being responsible, that has rights based on those capabilities. We cannot have any segment of the adult population that has safety nets that are legislated, that are policy, that protect that segment of the population from accountability for the consequences of their choices. It
Agreed.
does nothing but promote dysfunction and abuse.
There you go.
So
You know,
I'm
and-
going to get into our super chats because we got to
Okay.
get on to the after show. Karen, say your thing briefly, and then I'll move on.
Oh, I can't say it briefly.
Oh,
choose
hang
to
on.
say it at all.
Your sound just got really quiet. Did I screw up?
I don't know.
Let me. Boy, that's quiet. Did you get unplugged?
No, I'm not unplugged.
What the? Maybe it's
I think
just me.
that's on
It's
your
probably
end.
me.
Yeah.
Say something
Anyway.
else. Okay, now I can hear you.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
I fixed
Anyway,
it.
I can't say it briefly, so I won't say it at all for another time.
Save it for another. Okay. So we have Xeranx gave us $5 and said, "Why would Emma do such a thing? It's my nature," said the scorpion. Is that kind of like you knew I was a snake when you picked me up?
There you go.
Xeranx gave us another $5 and says, "Well, government is already involved in marriage. They're in your house. May as well make room for them in your bed. You think they're not already?" You know, we have this thing in the United States called the Food and Drug Administration. The Food and Drug Administration decides what types of birth control are approved. There's a significant amount of research that goes into persuading, providing the information needed to persuade the Food and Drug Administration to allow you to sell a product for that type of use, any kind of use that's interpreted as a medical use, to the general public. Guess what one of the hurdles is to getting a type of birth control like Vasilgel on the market in the United States?
What?
That would be the Food and Drug Administration. Getting past the Food and Drug Administration. You have to persuade them to say, yes, you can sell this to people. You can market the procedure to the general public.
Well, I would say that the biggest hurdle, though, is that, in India, this procedure costs $10 per 10 years, right? And even if you inflated that into, what it would cost, maybe $2,000 to be covered for 10 years, completely reversible whenever you want. But you're good for 10 years for $2,000. And can you imagine the number of married couples who would go for that instead of hormonal birth control at anywhere from $8 to $60 a month?
And I know where you're going with that. In the United States, it's probably going to be around $8,000 to $10,000 because that's the price difference. There was a vehicle, a car that was made in India that was a $2,000 car that when it was marketed in the United States was $8,000. Part of the reason was, they had to ship it, but part of the reason was you had to change the roof, you had to change the doors, you had to change the door handles, you had to have certain type of mirrors, you had to have a certain level of fuel efficiency. You had to have certain changes to the shape and structure of the body in order to live up to the United States safety standards. You had to have a level of emissions standards that were met by the vehicle. All of these things changed they had to manufacture an entirely different car specifically for the United States.
I don't think that that's actually a problem in this case. I think the biggest problem in this case is
the same phenomenon, the regulations.
No, the problem in this case, it's not the regulation. The FDA approval is not the problem. The problem is that there is no drug company in the United States who is willing to invest in something that's going to lose them money. So the reason why this procedure has been delayed is because it has been taken on by a nonprofit organization that mostly deals with how to humanely sterilize animals, how to humanely sterilize pets.
But it's being produced and sold in India, right?
Don't know if it's being sold in India.
Okay, because that's the thing. If it's already being produced and sold in India, a drug company in the United States doesn't have to adopt it. If it could be imported, a drug company in the
United States has to pay for the trials in the United States to get it FDA approved.
Exactly.
Yes.
So there's the problem.
But I don't trust the Indian government's drug freaking thing. Okay, I don't necessarily trust that, right? I'm fine with the FDA being the body that approves drugs sold in the United States. I'm a nationalist that way. Call me crazy, right? Okay, but there's no drug company that's interested in funding the trials that will get that approval because all it is for drug companies is a money.
Right, and it's partly a money loss because of that requirement. The thing is,
Well, it's partly a money.
If you really
it's
want,
a
if
money-
you really want to run
it's a-
down on the FDA isn't necessarily the best in terms of getting drugs approved and getting
Of course they're
medical. You're talking about an agency that is run by people that will accept political arguments, will accept, but I'm from this drug company, will accept all kinds of lobbying efforts in order to get something approved that maybe doesn't deserve
Like
to be
AGI?
approved, right?
Like AGI.
And
Yeah.
then at the other end of it, if you don't have all of those things, there are things that should be approved that don't get through because you don't have the inside track. You don't have the connection with the individuals running the agency. So it's not necessarily. I don't consider that the end all. It'd be better to not have that safety net in some ways.
Okay,
and it'd
but
be better
what-
to just be able to say to the drug companies, all right, if you put a drug out and it has the effects of thalidomide, and you didn't do the testing that was needed to find that out, and it's demonstrable that we can prove that this is actually your fault, we can sue you. And drug companies would be careful enough to avoid
might
those
be-
lawsuits. I
that
think
might
that'd
be
be
a
a better system.
Okay, that would be a better system, but maybe. But what I'm saying is, it's not profitable. That's
Right.
That's the thing. It's not profitable. It's kind of like we're in a
But it does still
right?
go back
your
to a
your
situation.
phone, your iPhone is engineered to become obsolete in 2 years, whether you want to or not. They're going to upgrade the software, the operating system, to the point where if you download the new one that you need to in order to
Okay,
communicate
Karen,
with
we
all of
can't
your
go
apps.
into this. This is going to take
Okay,
too long.
okay,
The
it's
bottom
not-
line
just-
is
just-
that it's still an example of the government being in your bedroom.
But it's also an example of corporations
Being in
not
your
wanting
bedroom.
not wanting to lose money,
Yeah.
right? And so
But
they have a vested interest.
It's still an example of the government being in your bedroom. And there is, yes,
All right.
there's a lot of other things to discuss about this, but it is also 10 p.m. here. So, in any case, sorry to cut you off on that, but we could do you and I could probably do a 6-hour show if we wanted to, but I don't think we want to right now. I can't. Mighty Balzac, I love that name. Mighty Balzac gave us $2 Australian, I think, and says sounds like like the Junior Anti-Sex League from 1984, talking about feminist, probably radical feminist, political lesbians. Mr. Roboto gave us $5 and said, Karen, without affirmative consent, how will we know it's not assault? Oh, and romance is dead, so anyone who want romance, well, it dead. And then dead forever. Maybe it's only mostly dead. We could revive it. Mr. Roboto gave us $2 and says, feminism is a tool for division, no convincing needed. Albert Nada gave us $2 Canadian and said, Lauren, did you see my North Country monologue?
Oh fuck! I can't. No.
I will say that today, while I was putting the show on Facebook, I finally saw the notification from last week where you pointed out to me that you couldn't send me a link on Twitter, but I didn't get a chance to watch the video today, so I'm going to have to watch it tomorrow. So I will see it, and I'll remind Lauren.
Yes.
Crawl Dragon gave us $2 and says, just wanted to leave a tip before bed. Not me, I get to go to work. And then M says, without a super chat, say hello to me, Hannah. So hello, M. And I think that's basically it. That's all the super chats. We are going to get into the after show, where we're going to talk about the feminist Monopoly game.
Oh God!
Which I take it personally because that was like one of my favorites on Family Game Night when I was a kid. The regular Monopoly game, because I was good at it, and fuck everything about this. And but you don't get to hear the rest of my complaints unless you happen to be in the after show. So And I'm not going to run the whole shill that Brian runs where he tells you how, so you have to actually go to Feed the Badger to find out. But with that, thanks everybody for listening, and thanks to my co-host for sticking out the long sausage with me and being willing to actually lengthen the sausage, even though I couldn't participate in an extra long sausage tonight. And thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. And good night, all.